Good morning from sunny and warm Southern Ontario. Good afternoon, good evening to our audience elsewhere. My name is Peter Mascher. I'm the Vice Provost of International Affairs at McMaster University. Welcome to day 3 of the 2021 CBIE Ontario Regional Meeting under the theme Opportunities for Higher Education, Keeping the Future Human. I hope you have found this week's programming rewarding and exciting, and that you're able to take full advantage of all the opportunities throughout the remainder of the week to network, build relationships, and learn from each other. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome you to an important and in particular timely panel discussion on internationalization and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Before we begin, I will take a few moments to go over some of today's Zoom webinar features. I'm sure you are by now relatively familiar with how Zoom works, but we've added some functionalities that should make it easier for you to communicate with us and easier for us to gather your questions and your comments. So we can, you can select your audio functionality, either use the speaker and microphone system of your computer, or if necessary, you can also call in using your cell phone. You can use the chat, and if you want to use the chat, please click on the chat button to open the chat panel, and then you can just enter the text, and the staff in the background will have an eye on what's entered into the chat. More importantly, though, we would like to invite you to use the Q&A functionality, because this is the functionality that we would like to use to gather all of the questions that we can then discuss during the question and answer session at the end of the panel discussion. We also have enabled a function that allows you to see a live transcript of what is being discussed, and there is a button in the upper bar of your image that allows you to activate the live transcript. With this, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce McMaster's Provost and Vice President Academic, Dr. Susan Tai, to offer a land acknowledgement and bring opening remarks.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. We're very pleased to have you with us today. So I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, and though we are all gathering virtually, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that McMaster University stands on the traditional territory shared between the Haudenosaunee and Mississauga nations and is protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. It is crucial to recognize that Indigenous peoples of Canada and the world have led the work of protecting the lands, waters, and health of our communities for many years before the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were created, and that they will continue to be our leaders into the future. As we progress towards these goals, we must remember that we are guests on this land and in this work. The SDGs intersect not only with the needs of Indigenous communities, but will be strengthened by the expertise Indigenous people bring to these goals. And in light of recent news, I think it is extremely important that we recognize that we have a lot of work to do with respect to how we treat and continue to develop and grow as one nation in partnership with Indigenous communities. It really is my pleasure to be here to welcome you to this session. I want to welcome all of the panel guests and all of the participants on this important topic of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in the work of internationalizing our higher education institutions. At McMaster, we're committed to each of the 17 SDGs in our mission to advance human and societal well-being. At McMaster, our researchers and students are leading both local and global projects focused around these goals, Whether we are researching food insecurity in the Hamilton community, helping internationally educated nurses enter the Canadian job market, or working with the World Health Organization to establish guidelines for ethical human challenge studies, we have centered our work on building a brighter world. McMaster's new strategic plan was recently developed with the consultation of our internal and external communities. It also speaks to the many of these goals. We have committed to become drivers of economic prosperity and social innovation in our research and in our teaching. We are committed to building partnerships with local, national, Indigenous, and global communities to transform our campus into a living laboratory for sustainability and to advance our global leadership and impact. I also know that we are not alone in these goals, and there are many higher education institutions around the world that are also building their learning, teaching, and research objectives around protecting our environment, improving the health and well-being of our communities, and encouraging peace and prosperity for all. These are very important goals. It is important to recognize that we are partners in this work, that we need to be working together collaboratively to solve these tough challenges. I am certain that the panel discussion today will spark meaningful conversations and new collaborations in this area. I'd like to close by extending my sincere thanks to our panel and moderator for spending time with us today to share their expertise and knowledge. I will now pass it back to Peter to introduce our esteemed panelists so that we can begin this interesting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. Those are really very inspiring words, and I think they set the stage perfectly for a panel discussion. So let me just very briefly introduce the panelists, and I'll introduce them in the order in which they will address the audience. I'll start with Charles Hopkins, who is the UNESCO chair at York University in Toronto. Monica Fröhler is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens in Vienna, Austria. Meghna Ramaswamy is the Director of the International Office at the University of Saskatchewan, and she has also kindly agreed to moderate the Q&A session at the end of this, after the panel. Andrea Baumann, Associate Vice President for Global Health in the Faculty of Health Sciences at McMaster University. And Omar Hernandez, Public Information Officer of the United Nations Academic Impact. So once again, before we get going, I would like to just encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentations in the Q&A box, and we will make sure to pick them up, at least as many as we can in the allocated time. So with this, I would like to invite Charles to start the proceedings with some of his remarks. Charles?
Great. Well, thanks very much. And thanks very much, Peter, and to my fellow panelists for giving me this opportunity to sort of lead off the discussion and in a way setting the stage between the various relationships between international education and the SDGs. I'd like to begin by just saying a few words about the SDGs themselves and sort of explain what they are and where they came from. The SDGs are simply the targets and goals and so on of the current international implementation plan, the 2030 agenda. This is the third of these international implementation plans. The first was Agenda 21. It ran from 1992 through to 2000. And then we had the Millennium Development Goals from 2000 to 2015. And we probably will be coming up again around 2030 with a plan from 2030 to 2050. I say this because the goal isn't the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. They are a current implementation strategy. But the big idea is looking at the relationship between international education and sustainability, or sustainable development itself, as opposed to the markers. Now, these goals and targets and so on give us a framework to work with. So they're extremely important, but I just wanted to put them in that kind of context. Now, there's always been a relationship with higher education over time, education in general. In the first one from 1992, Agenda 21, that education was looked at largely from the training of specialists, whether it was agriculture, marine biologists, that sort of thing. Then, and these targets, there were 40. This was set for all countries. Then the Millennium Development Goals shrunk way back. The target was the least developed countries, but again, education was there. Then now we have back, and education is taking a real front seat. Not only do we have our own Sustainable Development Goal 4, which addresses higher education sort of for the first time, realizing it, but also pointing out from not only preparation for jobs, but access to quality education in higher education and so on. But through SDG 4.7, 4.7 addresses sort of the combination of what we're talking about this morning: education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, but also in a context of gender equity, of cultural diversity, human rights, peace and nonviolence, and so on. So it's this broader aspect. The United Nations General Assembly has pointed out that education Goal 4.7 is the key enabler of all of the SDGs. So it's very, very important that we focus in on this ESD, or education, not about sustainable development, but using our education systems for a more sustainable future. There are 4 sort of rough access or targets within that. One is access and retention in quality education. But the second one is very important, and this is what we're struggling with. Recognizing it's our most educated countries that are creating much of the sustainability issues around the world. What we're trying to do is look at how we can repurpose, refocus education itself in its broadest sense: public awareness and training. Right? How can we refocus that and repurpose it from strict development to sustainable development? Now, engaging higher education is, if we look at it, most of the universities started on it by sort of greening the campus, greening operations, and so on, in the same way that business and industry went into it. It was cost savings. It was an economic aspect of it. But we have moved beyond that. And now, as Susan pointed out, we are looking at a whole institution approach. We're looking at sustainability and in research, we're looking at it in community service, we're looking at it in the broader service, global service, through collaboration between universities. I have 2 research networks at York, both in over 50 countries, and through the UNESCO chaired networks, we are working to try and advise both in the research and the implementation strategies. So higher education is extremely important. It's a target now for the UN. You see, such a small percentage of people actually get to attend higher education. The last statistics showed it was about 7% of the world's population. But that 7% will become sort of 80% of the people who will shape the world, the leaders. not only in academia, but in politics, in industry. They will become the faith-based leaders, the poets, the painters, the influencers through the social arts, and so on. So it's an extremely important one. Now, we're here and we're looking at it primarily through sustainability and internationalization and international education. And we'll be talking more about that as a collective of presenters. But looking at sort of there is a natural role in this global citizenship pursuit and sustainability on a global scale, and interpreting from the global scale to the local, sort of developing Ontario's sustainable development priorities and so on. Because international education, right in its very being, is this exploration of culture, exploration of built into our values, mission, our vision sort of building, along with this concept of global citizenship that Monica and others will certainly talk more about. But there are some sort of topical ones. Now people are concerned about climate change. They're concerned about the carbon footprint of global travel. But we also need, there is to overcome this